Sorry. Hi, Derek. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having me, Grace.
Okay, to start with the show, I before we dive into Derek's amazing background, I want to give a shout out to our actual annual conference. It's like our first conference. It's about AI. Obviously, Derek will be invited. Um, so yeah, so like there's a lot of amazing investors and founders that are gonna be there. Check it out. Okay, sorry, I have to present. Like I have to try to present because it's literally next week. Uh,
It sounds
yeah.
exciting.
Like so literally all the top investors and founders are gonna be there. If you want a ticket for half off, use the code Venture with Grace. And we're about to okay, sorry. Okay, let's like remove because I literally feel like we need to dive into the topics. Apologize for the chaotic moment. But anyway, okay, so Derek, you started your career as a tech reporter at Forbes, and then later on you work at Bain, and then now you're an investor at Menlo Ventures. Why don't we start with like what are some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career that you kind of took into work in venture later on?
Yeah, for sure. So I started my career in journalism. My first job while I was actually in school was at Forbes SF Bureau covering tech in the Silicon Valley. But I would say actually I really started it when I was still in school as a reporter for the Crimson, the school newspaper.
Mhm.
Eventually becoming president in my senior year. There's a lot of war stories from those two stints, both at Forbes and the Crimson. But I
Mhm.
think the things that really attracted me to journalism to start are really the same things that I think also attracts me to venture. It's fast paced, it's mission driven, and the core thing about journalism is the most interesting stories are found in the space between what is and what should be. And I kind of think about venture in the same way, where you're seeing opportunities, market opportunities, in that difference between what is today and what you really think should be. But I think there's a lot that happened in those 4 years, but the core lessons I took away from those are one, there are far more talented journalists than me out there. So I didn't think that journalism would be a long term career. But two, I got really sucked into the business of journalism. If the media industry has been one of the hardest hit by the digital revolution and the advent of online media. Now you have podcasts such as this one, as well as all kinds of different kind of consumption has moved online. And so it fascinated me kind of how media could survive in that digital age. And I knew nothing about business at the time. My senior year, when I was kind of running the Crimson, it was an independent $1 million per year business, but I was kind of
Oh
flying by the
wow.
seat of my pants. Yeah, we're very proud of that fact. All local and local ad revenue, digital subscriptions, things like that. But I thought that the best way to kind of learn about business then was to go to Bain. That's kind of a business school where you get paid to learn things. I had a lot of fun there. I was in SF, so this was during 2019 to 2021, kind of the peak of late stage crossover funds coming into kind of private markets and investing in high flying companies like SpaceX and Samsara and things like that. So had a lot of fun working with some of these growth equity investors, and that was my first exposure to venture. Decided I want to do an earlier stage version of that, and so that's how I ended up in Menlo and have been really enjoying it ever since.
Love that. I have a quick question on your journalism career. So like do you feel like I guess like have you ever had training on like how to actually diligence company throughout your time at Forbes or at the Crimson 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 Crimson?
Yeah,
I
Crimson.
cannot pronounce. Wait, what was that like kind of like the Stanford Hack Review or something like that? Or like I don't know, what is the equivalent of is it like just like Harvard's like technology
No, so
journalism
it
or
was
like just like
actually, yeah, so it was actually kind of their general, like the daily paper. So,
mm,
when I was first getting started, I was reporting on campus clubs and events.
mhm,
And then later that became college administration. So
mhm,
working with or reporting on Dean Karana, who was the college dean. No, the equivalent, I guess, for Silicon Valley folks is like the Stanford Daily.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and so it was really a not tech focused at all. Forbes was, because I was in Silicon Valley, was much more tech focused.
Mhm,
But yeah, in terms of like diligence in companies, I feel like journalists probably think about diligence in kind of a different way. Kind of
Mhm.
the heroes of like journalism is like exposing bad behavior.
Oh.
And, and so it's a different angle to it. I think it's
Honestly,
very
I
important to
I
be.
feel like yeah, I'm sorry that I break you, but, like, I literally feel like all the listeners are want, like, a crash course on, like, how do we get on, like, any media, but I wonder, like, how do you think about yeah, you mentioned about, like, exposing bad behavior, but, like, I guess, like, how do you even research if something is actually, true or not? And on the other hand, like, yeah, like, what did you do when you were working as a tech reporter? Do you have to, like, just, like, DMing VCs to be like, "Hey, can you comment on this?" But, like, how do you even have the first story in the first place? Is that, like, you go to a party, but you're actually listening in on what's actually happening with the drama or like how does that work in general?
Yeah, I guess there's like two types of stories. There's like the daily report, which is,
Mhm,
something happens. I remember when I was at Forbes, one of the big things was like, or maybe two big stories was Brexit, and so
mhm,
there's a lot of political after from that political event. There was a lot of implications for Silicon Valley and
mm,
what how um, companies like Facebook or Google would respond to that,
mm,
as well as this was during 2016, the rise of
mhm,
Trump the
mhm,
first time, and I think that there was a lot of uh, reporting on how Silicon Valley would react to that, and
mhm,
that was very different now 8 years ago versus now. So I think there was that type of story, and there was more of the investigative story, which is where you kind of go digging for things that people won't tell you.
mm.
And so I think I was a fan of both of them, but really I feel like the in journalism people really like the investigative stuff.
Got it. Okay, very interesting. Okay, maybe we start with your career at Menlo. So like I mean, obviously we have formerly like Steve from your firm, and then last week was Feza. And like, why don't we talk about like maybe in case people haven't heard about these two episodes, maybe we give the people like some overview on Menlo Ventures, the fund and the check size, and then like, obviously you guys invest in a lot of iconic companies like Anthropic. But why don't we give the audience a little bit of background, and then we can jump into your focus.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an investor at Menlo. I've been here for about 4 years now, working with Steve and Feza and the rest of the
Mhm,
folks at Menlo. So Menlo is a $1.4 billion fund. We've
mhm,
been around for almost 50 years now. So on our 16th fund, we invest seed to Series C and write checks of up to $50 million for these stages, and
mhm,
really focus on AI infrastructure and applications, which is also
mhm,
my focus. And so over the course of the past few years, we've been really active in kind of thinking about on the infrastructure side, what are the core building blocks that the next generation of app builders will reach for when they build their AI applications or agents. And then on the application side, we're thinking about the domain. So whether that's kind of a department like product and engineering or sales and marketing, or it's a vertical like healthcare or financial services that present the biggest opportunities for AI to come in and either accelerate or automate or make more efficient some of these industries.
For sure. I wanna maybe we could start with like, what's your overview in 2025? Because I think, obviously we will go through the 2024 one because it's like generative AI and enterprise, but I feel like this year is obviously a year for the agents.
Mhm.
So why don't we talk about like, maybe what are some like overview on the newest trends in both infrastructure and the agent side? And then I think you invest in unstructured, and
Mhm.
that's like John from Ajona also invests in it, uh, I believe. And then yeah, like I just had a conversation with him at Seattle Startup Week last week. Seattle Startup Summit. We
Yeah.
were on a panel together, and then like I was moderating him, and then basically he mentioned about like there's four type of agents. There is the ambient agent, and then there is a agent that like I think the most interesting was like the swarm agents. But
Mhm.
why don't we talk about like what kind of agents in your mind are out there, and then what like how do you kind of filter out which type of AI agent actually makes sense? And then we can talk about like the infrastructure side on like, is the agent more important versus infrastructure?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe I'll like start with like the what is an agent and
Mhm,
kind of address John's perspective there. I think that like there's a lot of different ways to categorize this, right? And one
mhm,
of the big debates is that nobody actually really even knows what an agent is. There's no
mhm,
agreed upon definition. But
mhm,
the way that we kind of see it is that maybe a slightly different perspective is that there's a range of autonomy
mhm,
for what an agent is. If you think about kind of when ChatGPT first came out and it was GPT 3 that was kind of OpenAI's first model that people could actually like touch and play with, and it was this great large language model. It actually, one of the interesting things is actually a little bit hobbled.
mhm,
It can there's many things that you could do with it at the time, but there's also many things that you couldn't. So,
mhm,
for example, they could only ingest so much data. Um, it's called the context window, and so you could only put in a certain, amount of tokens. There was
mhm,
no external memory, and so all kind of LLMs out of the box back then were stateless. They had this kind of conception of the world that was locked in during training, but you couldn't update that, and I think the cutoff
mhm,
date was like October 2022, I believe, in the first iteration.
mhm,
There was no access to tools, so they could talk to you, but they couldn't act, and there was no planning. So if you think think stream of conscious all at once,
mhm,
but couldn't step by step reason through a problem, and this is really apparent in math problems, which is why that was
mhm,
kind of like a weakness of LLMs back in the day. So agents kind of address all of that, and so you scaffold the LLM, and you can scaffold it in many different ways to make sure that they have external memory, they can ingest more data, they have access to tools, and they can actually plan out what they're going to do before they actually go out and do it. And so we see agents today in production as kind of a range of autonomy. So to what extent they actually take advantage of, especially this planning phase, and then the ability to execute that. And so you have like, in the article that you just pulled up, which is kind of like
mhm,
a new architecture for enterprise automation, we kind of give a few examples of like RAG is your most basic. We wouldn't call it agentic, but it's
mhm,
like a scaffolding on top of the core LLM to give it memory and statefulness. But then as
mhm,
you go into agents that are more autonomous, then you get things like the decisioning agent, which is you give it a kind of acrylic graph, where directed acrylic graph, a DAG, where you can kind of like map in a logic tree where you want the LLM to navigate down. So in a clinical kind of a claims decisioning workflow, for example, this company called Anterior does this, where people submit a prior authorization, which is can I get the surgery or not? And then somebody at a payer will kind of have an agent assisting them that navigates all the Byzantine like rules that payers have for whether or not this particular person in this particular case could get this particular surgery, and so you use this agent to help navigate that question. So I think that that's one of the more controllable types of agents.
mhm.
Then you get the next order of autonomy, which is sort of agent on rails, is what we called it, where instead of having a preset uh, DAG, you have a dynamically generated one. So it's just like the next order of magnitude more autonomous.
I have a quick question on this.
Sure.
Okay. Can you just like walk us through from 1 to uh 14 on like what is, for example, the rule book SOP? Like
Yeah.
what does this means?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe let's take kind of that claims or prior auth adjudication kind of example. So
Mhm,
this is a very healthcare specific use case, but I'll
mhm,
kind of walk through the architecture here
mhm,
with that example. So first, you have a rule book or an SOP, and enterprises have lots of these because
mhm,
usually, kind of the job you're augmenting is that of
mhm,
a somebody else who's already following a set of rules
mhm,
already.
mhm,
So insurers have like all of these different rules for when a certain procedure would be approved or denied. And
mhm,
that's really like for the decision agent, that's what we're getting at the
mhm.
very end.
Okay, by the
So
way, for the audience, so SOP is standard operating procedures, I believe.
yeah,
Okay, perfect. Okay, great.
that's right.
Uh-huh.
So you have this like written, usually these are like 150 to
Mhm,
200-page rule books or
mhm,
operating procedures. You feed all of this unstructured data
mhm,
into this is kind of like the basic RAG rules engine. You parse it out into kind of chunks, and this is actually where our portfolio company Unstructured comes in. They really help you kind of chunk it in the right way so that you could get the relevant context at retrieval time. So you chunk that, that's number two. You feed it into a large language model, which can help kind of add the intelligence layer to it. And then you add that as a node, or you add that as kind of like the core decisioning engine on what forms to be a graph of a decisioning graph. So, you can, if you think about like a decision tree, you can go A or B. Like if this is true, then go down this path. If this is true, go down that path. So that's kind of the
what does DAG stand for? Is that direct?
Yeah, directed acrylic graph. It's kind of just it's the same thing as a decision tree, really.
Okay.
And if the easiest way to conceptualize it actually is kind of like if you remember those like children's book that was like choose your own adventure, where it's like, oh, if you want to do this, turn to page 74, but you want to do that, turn to page 33.
Okay, that's DAG.
Pair rules are actually surprisingly similar to that, where it's like, if you clicked A in this box, go to this page and fill out this form. Or if you if you click B, then go to this page. It's actually surprisingly similar, which makes it kind of horrible to navigate because, as you can imagine, it's much less fun than the choose your own adventure books. But that's essentially what the rules engine is. It's just like an automated graph or decision tree that maps out the pair flows based on a rule book. So that's all done prior to when a prior auth request comes in. So then when you jump into, I think I might be skipping a few numbers, but the computer up there, an application comes through from a nurse. A nurse on the other side has a patient who wants a surgery. And so they'll go onto their kind of payer web portal. They'll submit an application with all the data. And essentially what happens is that input gets encoded into an LLM that then matches all of the inputted data about who the patient is and all of these details to navigate the DAG that was created. And then
is this supposed to be like, so for example, let's say I'm a patient, I ask for a surgery, and then like in here it just, does an input, augmented input and memory management all went back to this rulebook phase, or like it's just going back to processing, data cleaning and everything else here? Like does this thing go to here, or does this thing go to here?
Yeah, it goes to the first part, the rules engine, and maybe there's a lot of arrows going on this diagram, but essentially the model, if you think about it as like, it traverses the tree in a little bit in some ways, where it'll go down, it makes a decision at each breakpoint or each decision point, and then it chooses A or B, or a little bit more complex, but essentially that's kind of how it navigates the tree until it gets to the final decision that's like approve or deny.
Got it. Very cool. Thank you. And then for the unstructured, okay, so here's like, so after the rule book, so basically what you're seeing, it's like, okay, at the beginning, let's say how AI processing, like you mentioned about like the insurance, maybe this is an insurance example. So like basically the insurance will have a major rule book. You mentioned it's unstructured data, assuming, I thought it's going to be a PDF, or is this going to
PDFs we consider as unstructured data as well.
Okay, why? But that's like basically structured because it's just a block of text, right? Maybe there's some.
Yeah, I actually, this was learning for me too. I also would have thought that, but if you think about, a PDF, PDFs are laid out in many different ways. There's headers, there's footers. And if you ever try to copy and paste a PDF, like just the text into, a Word document or whatever, it comes out very weird, right? And so imagine trying to do that into an LLM. It ends up being not clean. And so as a result of that, and like there's different data structures, this is just like a regular PDF. If there's different columns, if there's graphs or tables within the PDF, there ends up being a lot of nuance. And depending on where you chunk it, because the retrieval engine to
Mhm.
provide context for an LLM only takes like a certain amount of chunks, right? So if you cut it
Mm.
off at a weird place, mid paragraph, it doesn't
Mhm.
you can't under the LLM can't understand the context that was the words that were before and after that chunk. And so as a result of that, it gets confused. And that's when hallucinations happen. And so
Mm.
unstructured helps you parse it. Number one, clean the PDF so that it becomes JSON, so very clean, kind of computer understandable code or computer understandable data, and then chunks it in a smart way so that all of the relevant context gets chunked together rather than split apart.
Got it. Okay. So basically the rule-based parsing is just like take out the page number, the header, and then combine them together. Okay.
Yeah.
And then it feeds into Anthropic, I would assume, or like
Mhm.
this is happening all at once or no?
Yeah, so you could either do rules-based parsing or a smarter kind of either unstructured or feed it into a language model and kind of
Mhm.
do more complex parsing or working with
Mhm.
more unstructured data. Rules-based is basically just like this is actually the initial form of RAG was
Mhm.
chunking it at like every 100 words chunk it,
Got it.
and so there's like that type of and you could probably be smarter about that, but that was kind of like the most basic form of that.
Got it. And then it makes it into decision tree for what? Is that like so for example, like your insurance can cover, I don't know, dental, like surgery and XYZ. And then like how do I process that data into, I mean,
Yeah,
using
like
this
what is that?
RAG process. Yeah, what is that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I guess the question yeah, I guess, like, yeah, so maybe example questions is, like, first is, like, who is the patient? Is this patient, a, like, male or female? Is this patient,
Mhm.
um which insurance does the patient have? Is it,
Mhm.
Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage, some type of commercial insurance? And then what is kind of their plan within that? And so, like, all types of if you've
Mhm.
ever filled out kind of a form in order to get a surgery, like it's
Mhm.
all of the questions that you would have to fill out there. And,
Mhm.
for each subset of like, you know, male 60 years old living in New York that
Mhm.
has like Medicare type B
Mhm.
plan, like all of these different subsets against
Mhm.
what elective either like kind of what procedure they want to get
Mhm.
um, determines whether or not that final decision of like um, whether uh, the claims adjudicator would approve or deny the case. And these are like
Mhm.
in back, it's not as if this is like a new process. Like there
Mhm.
used to literally be a nurse or a nurse practitioner that would sit
Mhm.
in offices and flip through pages and be like, okay, so this is a this type of insurance. Flip to this page and then go from there and manually do it.
Got it. Okay. So, and then it goes into like the unstructured context and then context engine. So like I guess like what does this part do since like the rule-based parsing already kind of clean part of the data and then it's unstructured at the beginning. Uh what is a unstructured context and data ingestion and vector database kind of plays in this?
Yeah. So that rules engine is really just to set the map, so to speak, to kind of set the DAG, and then you have the actual data come in from the person that then has to navigate the DAG. So
Oh.
that's where the application feeds into kind of the live retrieval
Mhm.
to navigate the DAG.
Like live retrieval meaning so is this part not live or
Yeah, so all of the rules engine part could actually happen, you know, when you're first setting up the agent as a payer,
got it.
versus, you actually need the claim to come or the prior auth to come in
Mm.
before you navigate that DAG.
Okay. And then this part just like basically digesting the actual live input. Let's say me filling out the form, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And then what about and then like we jump into here, I put in my stuff. But like why is this nigh? Because I feel like this part is already digesting the live data.
Yeah, the
Okay.
numbering might be might be a little confusing because all of these happen iteratively. So like I think
Oh, okay.
conceptually what we were thinking is that, first you have the rules engine and kind of setting up the map,
Mhm.
then you have like unstructured data processing of the prompt
Yeah,
and to navigate the DAG, and then it's kind of an iterative process from there, right? Where like they have to repeatedly go back to the source of truth, which is like the form that the patient/nurse filled in, and then like go to the next step, and then it kind of cycles in a loop.
got it. I wonder for all of these, since you invest in like unstructured data and like I mean unstructured, and then you guys have invested in Anthropic. So
Mhm.
is a goal for Menlo to like own a piece of every step, or like what's a kind of decision making process as an investor when you are thinking about decisioning agent as a whole category of things to invest in?
Yeah, totally. So we're very thesis driven investors. And so we like to kind of look at a space, think about why, things could be radically different than what they are today,
Mhm,
and then kind of invest behind that thesis. And so
mhm,
one of the theses that we had that led to the Anthropic, Unstructured, Neon, and Pinecone investments, as well as
mhm,
Clean Lab, was this idea of the modern AI stack. And so,
mhm,
in early 2023, this meant RAG. And
mhm.
so, kind of the order of investments that
Did
came
you
was
did you guys invest in both Neon and PyCon?
yes. They were so under two slightly different. I think that the design patterns has since converged, but Pinecone kind of it is the market leader in vector databases, just like
Right.
pure independent
Mhm.
vector databases. And Neon is a serverless Postgres database. I think kind of the nuance that actually happened post investment is that Postgres added PG Vector, which is a vector kind of addition or a kind of vector search with Postgres databases. And so Neon has kind of converged. Um, and so I think that it's an interesting thing about investing in early markets in infrastructure is that the design patterns aren't yet set, and people will
Mhm.
use different pieces of infrastructure in new ways that might surprise you. And so Neon actually is a great example of that, where like our thesis for Neon initially was that, um, you know, like Postgres is eating the world. So all the cool kids, all the startups that are interesting are using Postgres as their core database now.
Mhm.
Again, it kind of went through a revival. And
Mhm.
then on top of that, a serverless offering for Postgres should exist. So in the same way that Snowflake or Databricks for analytical workloads offers a very frictionless developer experience for serverless
Mhm.
analytics, there should be the same thing for transactional databases as well. And so
Is Neon a competitor of Timescale?
Timescale is also Postgres, but it's more of a time series database. Neon is a general purpose Postgres database, so you could use it for a time series, but that's just one of several use cases.
Got it.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So the Timescale CTO was on our podcast. I was like listening to
that's
the
so
time.
cool.
Yeah. But I was like just like yeah, I just started like digesting what's the relations between them. But okay, so and then what about like for I guess like basically you're saying like you guys are placing a bet in each of these like different steps, and I
Yep.
wonder how do you evaluate the I guess like the importance of like each different steps, because obviously I think most people have heard of Anthropic because it's more
Mhm.
of public facing slash consumer facing. What is your thought process on like which one would help you generate more revenue? And then since I feel like even so like I actually am not quite familiar with Anthropic's business model beside the $20 per month that I pay every month. But like beside those, like I don't really understand as a developer, how do you like spend like how much do you have to spend to like use Anthropic? Is that also $20 per month like every month? Or like how do you think about the monetization for each piece of these like different um subsectors of the decision making or the decisioning agent?
Yeah.
Um
So we
graph?
really think about it in terms of like different layers of the stack. And so at the very core of the modern AI stack is the actual
Mhm,
intelligence itself. So the large language model,
mhm,
which, you could call that the foundation model. And this includes things like companies like Anthropic, but also companies that kind of support that. So inference, for example, with players like Fireworks or Base 10 for open source inference. So I think there's that layer. Then the one on top is sort of the data layer, where you feed data into the large language model. So this would be Pinecone, Neon, and unstructured.
Mhm.
Then on top of that, you have orchestration. So that's where a LangChain or somebody like that would come in. And then perhaps the final layer on top of that is observability at runtime. So making sure your application, AI app or agent is doing the things that you think it should be doing. So it's kind of like a 4-layer cake. We actually wrote a different article, I think somewhere else on our website about this. But I think that when you think about value accrual to each of these layers, largely the history of kind of compute, when you think about the modern data stack, which is kind of the precedent to this, is that at the lower levels, when you have the data store, the closer you are to kind of like where the intelligence happens as well as where the data happens is kind of the two core areas for where value accrues. But then you then have things like kind of developer ergonomics and things like that that make it easier to develop AI applications that you can build really large outcomes in. And so we think about like value accruing to the bottom first. So that's why we invested in Anthropic, and then kind of the data layer with unstructured, Neon, and Pinecone. And then now actually two of the active thesis areas we're looking at are orchestration for how do you kind of pull together all of these different pieces of kind of AI infrastructure. As you can imagine it, like in the back end of an agent, they're making thousands of calls to all of these different enterprise systems, and that becomes kind of a mess to orchestrate or to put in the right order. Yeah, there we go, the modern AI stack. And so we're looking a lot at kind of either a framework approach, or there's a set of players that are called durable execution, which is a category that kind of orchestrate all of these calls, whether API or LLM calls, in the correct order, ensuring that nothing, you can do retries correctly, all of that type of stuff, and then runtime observability on top.
I have a quick question on this. So, I mean, I think we probably have an investor who actually invests in like each of these category. But I wonder, I have a question on this entire like picture.
Mhm.
So basically, I think like so since you guys have invested in, I feel like a lot of these are like in the layer two data space, but like I wonder like how do you think about you mentioned at the beginning it was this, I think this was the first kind of segment that you mentioned. And I wonder like from these different layers, is one layer that's more important than the other, or every layer have to functioning together? And then from like a money like or from like a business model perspective, can you maybe share a little bit more about like how do they kind of like make money?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe I'll take your questions one at a time. Sorry, remind me again of the first one.
The first one is like the I think you mentioned about this is like it's starting from here,
Mm,
and then I guess like how do you think about like so does like maybe I think my actual question is like, for example, let's say I'm a startup or
mhm.
let's say I'm a big company. So first of all, like who are like is every startup need all of these different tooling slash models slash like database and everything else? Or does a startup have to like is there like a base case that like everybody have to, not base case, I know that it's like actual term, but like okay, um like the bottom line is like, where would startup have to spend money on? Is
Yeah,
that basically here? Or like is this like more of I'm pretty sure I feel like this would be the layer that everybody spend money on.
yeah.
Um I guess like what's the most necessary like money spending category in the dev tool slash infrastructure space that people actually spend money on? And then we
Yeah.
could walk into the flow because I don't know if a startup need all of these two
Yeah. No, it's very
functions.
fair. I don't think that I don't think I've yet come across a startup that has a third-party solution for each of these categories we've
Yeah.
defined. So it's more of a conceptual map, but I would say the value probably accrues bottom up. So you when you're building an AI application, you do need to build something for each of these categories. Maybe like especially in the foundation and data layers. And so you know you definitely need an LLM. You could go out and
Mhm.
by Anthropic, or DeepSeek came out and made a big splash, and so you could choose to pull something open source. Um,
Mhm.
but you at the end of the day, you need an LLM, right? In the
Mhm.
same way as like if you're building an interesting enterprise AI application, you need a data layer. So you need a vector database or some type of vector store that could be part of a Databricks or Mongo, or you could have a specialized database like Pinecone. You need some data pipelines to get data
Mhm.
from your existing enterprise systems like your
Mhm.
Salesforce, your Slack, or Gmail into your new AI app. And so
Mhm.
you need some sort of data pipeline. Unstructured is kind of the bet we made, but you could kind of build it yourself. So like for all of these categories, you could build it yourself.
Mhm.
But I would say in general, like the things that the lower down in the stack that it goes, the harder it becomes to build yourself.
Mhm.
And so that's why you see a lot of value, or you see a lot of startups definitely reaching for the frontier models. So Anthropic has kind of their revenue has skyrocketed. We in the when we first invested in the Series C in January of 2023, I believe they were still pre-revenue, and in the short 2 years since then, they've really cemented their place as a core kind of foundation model that folks will reach for and use, especially for B2B use cases like coding, for example.
How much would developer pay for Anthropic to code something?
Yeah, it a lot is the short answer. I would say that because it kind of reflects the value that it brings, right? When you're
Mhm.
building an AI application, and this was kind of the question early on. I
Mhm.
think we've since evolved past it, but the question early on was like, if you're building at the application layer,
Mhm.
um, how much value are you bringing versus how much value is really brought by Anthropic and these large language models.
Mhm.
And I think we've since discovered, with the rise of Cursor, with
Mhm.
Perplexity, with Glean, that there's these examples of, end user experience, the specific
Mhm.
workflows that they care about and operate in and are comfortable with really do matter. And that's not something that
Mhm.
Anthropic is going to build for. Anthropic is very clear. We want to build the best models, and that's kind of our reason for being. That is our
Mhm.
focus. And then we actually want a robust developer ecosystem on top that will
Mhm.
take that core raw intelligence and then apply it to all
Mhm.
of these different end use cases where they have a lot of value. But I think that the because if you're a company like Cursor, for example, um,
Mhm.
so much value is derived from uh, partnering up with state of the art models.
Mhm.
There is very high willingness to pay at this moment. And
Mhm.
interestingly, I should note on that point, um, in terms of large language models, there's a lot of there's not just Anthropic out there, but we have OpenAI and DeepSeek and
Mhm.
Llama and all of these different models. We've really seen that value accrues to the state of the art model, whoever has the best model. If you have like the last generation or even half a generation before that model, the depreciation curve on that is pretty steep. And so the core focus of Anthropic is really to have the best model because we haven't reached yet the ceiling of intelligence, the part where intelligence starts to flatten out. And so when you have an incrementally better coding model, for example,
Mhm.
it actually accrues exponential value because of the difference between, for example, Claude 3.7 Sonnet and Claude 3.5 Sonnet.
Mm. Um, I wonder, so like for I guess like for Anthropic and OpenAI and Llama 3 and DeepSeek, what's the core difference? when it comes to the output, because like I mean, I personally use um ChatGPT and Anthropic in very different ways, but I actually don't understand what's the difference between the models on the foundational layer. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
allowed to say layer, but
No, it's a very fair question. And I would say like the macro reason for that is probably because all models are so intelligent now where they're
Mhm,
probably good enough for like most basic use cases, right?
mhm,
Like if you just want to chat with the model or if you want to search something up, like most
mhm,
models are good enough for that, but real and this kind of speaks to where like evaluations are probably breaking down or not enough
mhm,
today. Is that there's no good like core measure of like you can cleanly plot the intelligence of every single model and kind of compare them head to head in a really easy way. There's a
mhm,
lot of different evals out there that and whenever a new model comes out you'll see them reference a handful of these different
mhm,
evals, but at the end of the day it's really how useful is it for your end application,
mhm,
and so the real measure of it is really just usage.
mhm,
So I would say that like I think at a what is Anthropic uniquely good at, they really position themselves as kind of wanting to build the best general intelligence, but the applications where people have found that to be most helpful include things like coding, where all of the major code providers, whether that's Cursor, Codium, Devin, GitHub Copilot, even which had a close partnership with OpenAI, are now working primarily with Anthropic on their models because of how useful they are for coding tasks,
mhm,
writing, unstructured data retrieval, like some of these that are more enterprise B2B use cases.
mhm.
Anthropic has found a lot of traction with.
Mm. Okay, so I'm just seeing all the like I'm just going through these. I feel like I wonder what are some, I guess since this is like the 2024 report, what changed since then for the state
Yeah,
of
yeah.
generative
So
AI and
I,
enterprise?
it has only been 3 months since
Mhm,
this was released. So
mhm,
for context, this is the Enterprise 2024 State of Enterprise AI report. It's
mhm,
the second report that we've published,
mhm,
that kind of annually the idea is we'll go out and ask 500 of our ecosystem partners, whether that's IT buyer. Well, this survey is just focused on kind of IT buyers and procurement, how they're adopting, how they and their organizations are adopting AI.
mhm,
And so this was released in December of 2024. And I think the biggest conclusion here was kind of a couple of things like usage, I would say, has really expanded between 2023 and 2024.
mhm,
Where 2023, there was a ton of experimentation, people were interested in AI, but it really wasn't in production yet. You couldn't point to
mhm,
somebody like Glean or Sana, one of our portfolio companies, or Cursor. Like those companies didn't exist yet. And so people were like, oh, this could theoretically do a bunch of interesting things, but there were no proof points. 2024 is like, no, there's like now companies that you can point to, that you can buy, that you can kind of implement in your organization. And it's making a massive difference. So
mhm,
that would be the kind of the conclusion of 2024. In the year since, I think there's been a ton of excitement about agents, and so we talked about different agent architectures and how they work at the beginning
mhm,
of the show. I would say that reminds me a lot of like what RAG looked like in 2023, where we're just getting to the point now where you see the potential of what it could be. I would
mhm,
say that models need to get more intelligent, their tool use needs to get better. There's like a little bit of like tech, there's a little bit to go in terms of when the technology actually gets there to be able to reliably perform. And then people at the app layer are figuring out what the best design patterns are to actually put them into production. But I would say that that's kind of the biggest thing that people are, that we've been spending a lot of time on and are really excited about so far in 2025.
totally. Okay, so maybe we switch gear a tiny bit on generative AI market map,
Mhm.
um, which is like I guess the application side of things. I know that you invest in some like healthcare company and you have invested in obviously like just I don't know, like all the I guess like video AI and security and like just everything. So maybe we could start with like what are some exciting things that you think are in the vertical AI landscape? And then maybe we could dive into one of your portfolio companies on how you kind of like meet them, to how you diligence them, to evaluate the valuation side of things, as well as like access strategy and everything else.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so maybe on the vertical AI part,
Mhm,
I think that we think about it as what is the difference between what are the biggest markets where
mhm,
there's a lot of rote manual workflows. You've probably heard the term services as software.
mhm,
And so this is kind of like the idea that the biggest opportunities in AI exist where there's lots of services today. And
mhm,
actually, maybe another way of reframing it is like, what are all the markets that SaaS forgot about?
mhm,
Um, with the SaaS revolution, you could have things that are copilot, or you could have like systems of record, systems of engagement. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool that somebody will use
mhm,
to help do their job. Now with AI, you can actually the AI could do the job that exists. And so
mhm,
the three big ones are healthcare, legal, and financial services, and that's where
mhm,
we've spent a lot of time over the course of the past few
mhm,
years. So healthcare, we think a lot about the clinical workflow and kind of
mhm,
from like when you're going to the doctor to visit, there's a lot of things that are happening on the back end in terms of their clinical like kind of back office workflows. At intake and scheduling and triaging, they need to determine why you're going to the doctor. And so there's a lot of coordination, and all of this happens today with nurses in the background, um,
mhm,
sometimes literally faxing or handing paper slips to each
mhm,
other. And so it's a very antiquated kind of workflow that SaaS really hasn't touched.
mhm.
And so now
Oh,
with AI,
can I ask why did SaaS not touch these? Because I like your perspective on that because I've never hear about people saying, I mean, antiquette industry this year and last year were becoming very hot. Like
mhm,
people like to do I guess like some people call it like yeah, I don't know, like just like the traditional industry that's like kind of like on tap. But I'm like, if it is on tap by the traditional SaaS industry, why is it gonna be changed by AI? Because it seems like it's like a adoption slash go to market problem than the actual AI problem.
yeah, I mean, so let's just take healthcare as an example. Like
Mhm,
the biggest company in software company in healthcare right now is Epic,
mhm,
which is a
mhm,
company based in Madison, Wisconsin, founded in 1979. And so it's very much outside of like, the traditional what you think about as Silicon Valley, but it's
mhm,
entrenched itself over the years as really the kingmaker of all things software. If you want to build software for hospitals, you have to probably
mhm,
go through Epic either
mhm,
as a partner or a competitor, which is much more scary.
mhm,
But if you think about like what a nurse or what a doctor does all day, like they don't really care about, you know, tech enabling it, right? Like doctors
mhm,
want to provide care, nurses want to do their admin workflows and assist doctors in care, and kind of that's the reason you go into some of these fields at all. And
mhm,
so when a SaaS vendor 10 years ago went to a doctor or a nurse and was like, hey, we can have this thing where you can take all your notes in, or we can, have these things where usually it was some form of that, right? It's like
mhm,
this automated system where you could take your notes in and then it would help automate through, code on the back end, some of these workflows that you had. It was not compelling enough of a value proposition versus what the incumbent Epic offered,
mhm,
that it compelled anybody to switch. And so,
mhm,
by and large, healthcare, which is responsible for something like 20% of GDP, was just written off as a category
mhm,
for SaaS vendors to really go after. And so, when AI came around, all of a sudden, maybe like clinical ambient scribes is probably the
mhm,
biggest and most prominent example of this. All of a sudden, you go in with an ambient scribe that can take notes
mhm,
for you that you used to
mhm,
have to hire an external scribe for, or you were at your computer instead of facing the patient as a doctor. All
mhm,
of a sudden that value proposition got in like 100x more attractive. And
mhm,
so as a result of that, it was not necessarily, I would say that it's probably more of a product unlock. And then the flywheel is more of a go to market where, once Cleveland Clinic adopts it, then,
mhm,
Kaiser wants it, then, hospital X, Y, and Z want it.
Mhm.
But the initial unlock was really technological, where you could then automate services that somebody had to manually do. And
Mhm.
moreover, services that were annoying to do because a doctor or a nurse didn't go to medical school
Mhm.
in order to, take more notes after seeing a patient.
Mm. What about the rest of it? I feel like obviously legal is another really popular one. And yeah, like I guess like how do you think about from the investment return perspective? Like, I mean, obviously all of them could have like a major winner, but like how do you think about like spending energy into each subsector and then which subsector you personally feel like is will generate the most amount of return when if everything plays right. And then what is like the I guess since like AI becoming um I wouldn't say commoditized like so like basically AI becoming like a major like you mentioned Anthropic is powering a lot of these things or like the I guess the infrastructure side of things it's powering a lot of the innovation. So it sounds like it's becoming like a brand or like go to market um war between like each of these like subsector vertical AI applications or what do you think are making them having a moat
Mm,
compared to some of these competitive companies? And then also a piggyback question is like right now a lot of companies are in the trial and era like all the big companies are purchasing different tools because no one wants to be um you know adequate or just like basically no one want to be old. So I
yeah,
wonder how do you think about like having repeatable sales motion
yeah.
to like
All really good questions. So in terms of areas that I find most interesting, I've been spending a lot of time in healthcare and legal. These are massive markets that are
mhm,
very deep in terms of the ability to support multiple potential unicorns here. And you've already seen like a Bridge and
mhm,
Hippocratic companies like that kind of achieve that scale. And I
mhm,
think that just if you think about the amount of workflows there,
mhm,
uh, there's many more that you could
mhm,
potentially address. And same thing with legal.
mhm,
Maybe this this map might not be totally up to date in terms of like our investments, but like Eve and Everlaw are two examples of like folks that are building in litigation workflows
mhm.
and are doing incredibly well. But then you
Oh,
also, yeah.
sorry, I have another question on this segment. Like for the legal part, so there is two schools of thoughts. Only one part is like uh replacing lawyers slash like the chat GPT for lawyers, and then the other part is like helping lawyer to bill more hours slash like the tools that are like helping lawyer to do some administrative work. Which part would you think is better?
Yeah, I haven't. To be honest, I haven't been super excited about replacing lawyers. There's also, all kinds
Mhm,
of legal things that you need to get into before actually kind of stepping into kind of the
mhm,
core workflow of the lawyers themselves.
mhm,
But like Eve, for example, definitely assists a lot of lawyers in their day-to-day workflows.
mhm,
They help kind of draft briefs. They help research things. They help search your documents when you have a dump of like 100,000 different pages that you have to read through that some poor associate
mhm,
had to do manually back in the day.
mhm,
um, I think that all of those things can be automated now that are more admin type workflow. But
mhm,
you do have, it was interesting back in the day, there was this company called Atrium that David Kahn, the founder of Twitch, founded. That
mhm,
was this idea of like a tech enabled law firm. I do think that that idea is pretty interesting, where you have what is the law firm of the future look like, and companies like Manifest and immigration law, for example, I think are now kind of taking another crack at that idea. But I think that most of it is by automating and scaling up the lawyer. So in immigration law, for example, one of the things that's really unfortunate about the state of play today is that you have all of these like solo practitioner immigration lawyers, but they're spending up to 50 or 60% of their time sometimes just on the phone, cold calling or taking inbound from folks who to qualify their case to see whether or not they should take it or not, and only a minority of their time actually practicing law and doing what you think of the idea of like practicing at the top of your license, doing what you love and what you actually are intellectually interested in, and honestly where the value really accrues. Well, AI can automate all the rest of your time that you're doing, kind of taking inbound leads, qualifying them, seeing if you should take on the case or not, as well as in the actual kind of the actual practice of filing paperwork and things like that, automating some of those workflows.
Mm. I wonder, so like maybe we could, since like I want to give your portfolio companies like a shout out or something. So
Mhm.
like why don't we start with, sorry, not this one. Why don't we maybe use one of your portfolio company as like an example? Maybe you can walk us through like how you kind of meet them, to how you diligence and win the deal and then think about exit.
Yeah, maybe we could talk about unstructured a little bit more.
Mhm,
I think that one was, starting from the thesis. It was this idea of the modern AI stack.
mhm,
We had at this time we had already invested in Anthropic and Pinecone, and so
mhm,
the kind of core intelligence layer as well as the data store. And then one of the core missing pieces when you think about the RAG pipeline, which is the predominant kind of architectural pattern to first emerge in the
mhm,
LLM revolution, is that you need a data pipeline to connect all of these systems to
mhm,
your enterprise existing systems of record where your data is stored today. And so unstructured was a leading kind of, we actually first saw it because we saw a lot of buyers that we chat with kind of use unstructured already in their day-to-day workflow. So you already had companies like Salesforce and Amazon like using unstructured's open source solution uh,
mhm,
in order to build RAG pipelines, which we were like, okay, we should probably talk with this
mhm,
company. Met Brian and his team, and he was incredible. He had kind of an amazing history that actually you should ask him about it sometime.
mhm,
Includes a CIA, and then when he built unstructured, it really was kind of matching our thesis of, this data pipeline is a missing piece in productionizing RAG back in the day.
mhm,
And we absolutely agreed with that. Like, we're huge fans of him and kind of how he was approaching this. And so decided to partner up and have been very happy with kind of working with them ever
mhm.
since.
Can I also ask about like the AI valuation? This will be my last real question. Sorry, like I think we went over, but how do you justify like the crazy valuation on some of these AI companies? And do you have like a valuation cutoff line? And since you guys partner with companies in various different stages, any thoughts on like, what is like the new, I guess, ARR benchmark, for, let's say you partner with unstructured Series B, like what's the, I guess, like if there's any cutoff line or like any revenue benchmark that you guys are looking for to
Yeah.
partner with the company?
I don't necessarily think there's any like valuation cutoff lines. I would say that we are the reason why like valuations are high
Mhm,
today, and I think that that's just probably broadly true, especially if you look against public markets, is just that people are really, really excited about the potential of some of these companies.
mhm,
And I think that, some folks have commented on this before where like it's never been easier, or we've never seen so many companies go 0 to 1, 1 to 10,
mhm,
even like 10 to 100 so fast before, right?
mhm,
This used to be reserved for only like a once in a decade company, and in the past like few years we've already seen, I can count like 5 companies that have followed similar trajectories
mhm,
there. And so I think the high valuations reflect the excitement that people have for these.
mhm,
It definitely makes it harder to invest in the earlier stages because not every company is that type of company.
mhm,
And if you invest as if they were, then both the expectation as well as how much they have to hire, the
mhm,
operations to support that type of growth
mhm,
grows in anticipation of something that
mhm,
you really need to see whether or not they're ready for that type of scale or the market has that type of pull immediately. But I would say that that's kind of the valuation environment and what we're dealing with in terms of like how we navigate it. I think we very much believe that those companies will proliferate, and there will be more and more of those in the future. And so, you just have to make sure that you're finding them wherever they emerge from and partner up with them, which, I think we've been lucky enough to partner up with a few of them already. But always looking to kind of find who the core players are in this next AI revolution.
Amazing. Okay, so I have a 1-minute fire round for you. What's your favorite book?
Um, I'm I like a lot of books, but the one that I'm reading right now is The Technological Republic by Alex Karp.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I would say my family. I have 2 younger brothers, as well as my mom and dad.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Well, speaking of books, maybe like Ernest Hemingway. He's a favorite author of mine.
Where can we find you outside work?
Skiing. I really like Tahoe.
Love that. The Bay Area,
Bay Area,
Bay Area
classic Bay
native
Area
answer.
response.
Exactly. Love that. Thank you so much, Derek, for coming on the show today. It was such a masterclass in the infrastructure of AI and AI agents.
It
Well,
was great.
applications. It's not like agents, but yeah.
Thanks so much for having me, Grace.
Okay, let me quickly end stream. Sorry, it's gonna take